Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start from Pakistan, where Prime Minister Imran Khan has announced the launch of a relief program to help poor families in the wake of COVID-19 outbreak. Speaking to journalists in Islamabad, Khan said around $860 million will be dispersed among over 12 million impoverished families. The Prime Minister went on to say that social distancing is vital to curtail the spread of the disease. He warned that public gatherings can aggravate the situation and people must follow government's instructions. There are nearly 4,100 infections in Pakistan, with 58 deaths and 467 recoveries. Meanwhile, in the US, nearly 2,000 people have died from the coronavirus in the last 24 hours, raising the total number of deaths to over 12,500. In Spain, the number of deaths has risen for a second day, with 757 new fatalities in the last 24 hours. Iran's coronavirus deaths have crossed the 4,000 mark, with 121 new fatalities. The global number of infections are more than 1.4 million, with almost 83,000 deaths. This report will now tell you more.
With the global number of infections and deaths increasing hourly, a slight slowdown brings hope that the worst has passed. In the U.S., New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said the numbers of daily ICU admissions and general hospitalizations declined for another day, but the state suffered its highest number of fatalities in a day, with 731 new deaths. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has accused the World Health Organization of being China-centric.
The WHO, that's the World Health Organization, receives vast amounts of money from the United States, and we pay for a majority, a biggest portion of their money. They've been wrong about a lot of things, and they had a lot of information early, and they didn't want to. They seem to be very China-centric, and we have to look into that, so we're going to look into it.
Meanwhile, a midnight light show brightens up Wuhan seconds after China ended a 2-month lockdown from the city. However, mainland China has reported 62 new cases, up from 32 a day earlier. In Europe, the UK's 10 Downing Street says Prime Minister Boris Johnson is breathing without assistance as he spent a second night in the intensive care unit. France has become the 4th country to surpass the toll of 10,000 deaths, while Spain and Italy are hoping the peak has passed. Spanish officials said over 40,000 patients have recovered from the disease.
And finally, to say that more than 40,000 people have already been discharged. 40,437, and this already represents almost 30% of the reported cases, which is one of the percentages that are increasing every day.
Elsewhere, North Korea maintained it is virus-free with over 500 people placed in quarantine. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has said she is cautiously optimistic as officials reported the lowest number of daily new cases in 2 weeks.
Moving on towards China, which has once again called for a peaceful solution of the Indian-occupied Kashmir conflict under UN Security Council's resolutions. The valley is under India-imposed curfew and communications blackout for the last 248 days. China's UN mission rejected Indian claim that Beijing is ignoring Pakistan's call for urgent reconsideration of issue in Security Council. The mission spokesperson said China's stance on issue of Kashmir is unchanged for decades. He said Kashmir is high at the agenda of UN Security Council and China is monitoring the situation closely. The spokesperson said Beijing opposes any unilateral decision which complicates the current situation. In India, students, academics and activists have condemned communalism over COVID-19. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government and media have been blaming Muslims for the spread of virus in the country. In a statement, over 100 citizens urged the government and TV channels to stop spreading hatred against Muslims. It recognizes sudden glare at the markaz in Nizamuddin, the global headquarters of the Tablighi Jamaat. It said raw communalism has been unleashed against Muslims, with the government's recognition of Nizamuddin as a hotspot for the virus. The statement said criminalizing the organizers and participants is nothing short of finding a scapegoat within the Muslim minority community. EU finance ministers have failed to agree on a bailout plan to help member states hard hit by the coronavirus outbreak. 16 hours of discussions failed after Italy refused to abandon its plea for corona bonds to share the burden. The finance ministers are expected to agree on a €500 billion program to cushion economic slump and finance recovery from the pandemic. Issuing joint debt has been a battle line between economically ailing southern countries and the fiscally sound north, led by Germany and the Netherlands. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez warned the bloc will fall apart if the EU fails to come up with an ambitious plan to help member states saddled with debt. Finance ministers will discuss using $443 billion European Stability Mechanism bailout fund on Thursday. Turkey says its forces have conducted a third joint patrolling with Russian troops on a key highway in Syria's northwestern border in Idlib. The defense ministry says troops from the two countries carried out land and aerial inspections. The patrolling exercises are part of an agreement brokered between Turkey and Russia on March 5th in Moscow. The presidents of both countries agreed to a ceasefire and military patrolling to ensure the truce in the region. The Syrian government have been accusing Turkey-backed rebels of breaching the cessation of hostility agreement last month. Turkey aims to create a safe zone for displaced Syrian refugees at the border front of Idlib. Israel and Palestinian organization Hamas have agreed to hold talks over prisoner swap. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said Tel Aviv is ready to negotiate with the group through intermediates. Netanyahu's office said talks will be held for release of Israelis and retrieving soldiers' bodies killed in 2014 war. It said Tel Aviv is ready to negotiate with a deal with the rival group to ensure a return of missing people. Meanwhile, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar said there is a possibility for an initiative to move forward with the prisoner swap. Sinwar said his party is ready to show flexibility on the swap. Palestine has rejected Israel's West Bank annexation plan, reiterating its commitment to UN resolutions. Earlier, reports said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and head of Blue and White Party Benny Gantz reached an agreement on annexation. Palestine Presidential Office said it will not allow Israel to manipulate and undermine international legitimacy resolution. The office said this destructive and dangerous policy will not bring security or stability to anyone. It said Palestine will continue struggle for its land until the establishment of the independent state. It said only way to reach stability is to remain committed to international law and legitimacy resolutions. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has asked the International Monetary Fund for a $5 billion loan to help Tehran fight COVID-19. Addressing his cabinet, Rouhani said there should be no discrimination in lending loans as Iran is also a member of the Monetary Fund. Rouhani said all international institutions must fulfill their duties, especially during this deadly pandemic. He also called US sanctions on Tehran as economic and medical terrorism, saying it violates international medical convention. Discussing domestic situation, Rouhani said the government will provide economic assistance to the families across the country. The president said the first wave of coronavirus is over in the country. The Taliban have recalled their negotiators from Kabul after suspending prisoner exchange talks with the Afghan government. Taliban spokesman Sohail Shaheen says the Kabul administration is deliberately delaying the release of their prisoners. Shaheen said group's prisoners must have been released much earlier under the Doha peace agreement. He said relevant sides are violating the peace deal by delaying prisoners' release. The spokesman said the timely release of inmates would have paved the way for intra-Afghan talks. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said all Afghan sides must begin negotiations on a political settlement to end decades of war. Ecuador's former President Rafael Correa has been convicted and sentenced in absentia to 8 years in prison on corruption charges. Korea was convicted along his vice president George Glass and 19 other high-ranking officials and businessmen who allegedly received $8 million in bribes. The court also banned Korea from participating in politics for 25 years. Following the ruling, Korea said the sentence is a form of political persecution intended to prevent him from returning to politics. Korea ruled from 2007 to 2017, but then moved to Belgium after landing power to Lenin Moreno. The former president had expressed interest in running for office in 2021. In another news, in Turkey, 5 people have been killed after an improvised explosive device went off on a road near the southeastern town of Kolp. The regional governor's office said the deceased were forestry workers traveling to work. It blamed the attack on Kurdish rebels who have waged a decades-old insurgency in the mainly Kurdish-populated region. But there was no immediate claim of responsibility. The conflict has killed tens of thousands of people since it started in 1984. The group known as the PKK is considered a terror organization by Turkey, the United States, and the European Union. Meanwhile, Turkish jets neutralized 2 PKK terrorists as part of a counter-terrorism operation in northern Iraq. In UK, 5 boats carrying 63 migrants have been intercepted and brought to Dover after trying to cross English Channel in 4 dinghies. 3 boats were met by UK Border Force and a 4th boat was intercepted by French authorities, while a 5th boat carrying 9 people was rescued and returned to France after being spotted by a cross-channel ferry at the port of Calais. UK's Home Office said all of those brought to the UK will be monitored for signs of COVID-19. Home Office said authorities on both sides of the channel were working together to stop the crossings being facilitated by criminals. It said 110 smugglers have been convicted and imprisoned since January 2019. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. The UN has urged Sudan to coordinate with its organizations for aid efforts for the country's most poor people to fight COVID-19. In a joint statement, 23 UN organizations called on Khartoum to facilitate the provision of humanitarian assistance in the country. UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Sudan, Guy Yuep said if not properly coordinated, aid delivery may be delayed. The statement said over 9 million people require humanitarian aid across Sudan this year. A UN study says 81% of the global workforce of over 3 billion people have had their workplace fully or partly closed. The UN agency, International Labour Organization, reported the data as lockdowns grind economic activity to a near halt. The organization's Director General Guy Ryder said workers and businesses are facing catastrophe in both developed and developing economies. ILO said the pandemic is expected to wipe out nearly 7% of working hours across the world during the second quarter of 2020. That is the equivalent of 195 million full-time workers losing their jobs. It said there is a high-risk global unemployment figure would surge past estimate 25 million people by the year-end. Meanwhile, the founder of Twitter and payment app Square, Jack Dorsey, said he will donate $1 billion towards efforts to tackle the pandemic. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has suspended rotation and deployments of peacekeeping units until June 30th due to the coronavirus outbreak. UN's chief spokesman, Stefan Dujarric, said the bloc seeks to ensure COVID-19 free status of incoming personnel. He said the UN wants to mitigate the risk of peacekeepers from being a contagion vector and maintain operational capabilities. He said limited exceptions will be considered to continue to deliver on the mandate in emergency circumstances on the basis of strict conditions. Anti-malaria drug hydroxychloroquine continues to be a subject of debate. Weeks after the US President Donald Trump touted it as a COVID-19 treatment. However, medical experts say there is no conclusive evidence of the efficacy of the drug. Regardless, doctors around the world have continued prescribing it for the coronavirus patients. This report will now tell you more.
With experts warning a vaccine to the COVID-19 could still be 18 months away, much of the world has turned its hope towards hydroxychloroquine, an anti-malarial drug that has been in use since the 1950s. This happened after US President Donald Trump claimed the drug could move mountains in the fight against the virus last month. Since then, the US Food and Drug Administration has also approved it for use against COVID-19 infection.
Hydroxychloroquine and the Z-Pack, I think, is a combination, probably is looking very, very good, and it's going to be distributed. We have 10,000 units going, and it'll be distributed tomorrow.
But the experts warn the US government's commitment to the drug is premature. Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has stressed more research is needed before the drug's effectiveness can be proven. He warns the US can't use hope as a strategy against the pandemic.
There are those who lean to the point of giving hope and saying, give that person the option of having access to that drug. And then you have the other group, which is my job as a scientist, to say my job is to ultimately prove, without a doubt, that a drug is not only safe, but that it actually works.
One research in France has reported COVID-19 patients treated with the malaria drug showed no signs of an infection after 8 days. But last week, a team of scientists from Paris reported they had tried to reproduce the results in their own study, but failed. As such, a conclusive answer to the hydroxychloroquine question remains weeks, if not months away. Taken without medical supervision, the drug can cause severe unwanted reactions, including organ damage and fatal overdose.
WhatsApp has announced that it will impose a strict new limit on message forwarding. The Facebook-owned chat app said the decision has been taken to slow the dissemination of fake news. It said that any message that has been forwarded 5 times will now face a new limit. This will prevent a user from forwarding it to more than one chat at a time. The service said the move allowed it to reduce the volume of message forwards globally by 25%. WhatsApp is used by more than 2 billion people worldwide. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues, virtual gatherings have quickly replaced regular social interactions for many people around the world. But in Japan, one university has taken a completely novel approach to the concept. It hosted a graduation ceremony using avatar robots controlled by students from their homes. Let's find out more about this in this report.
Universities around the world have been cancelling spring graduation events in light of the coronavirus crisis. But Tokyo's Business Breakthrough University managed to find a way to hold a memorable ceremony for its students. Tablets running a video chat application were mounted on robots, which were controlled by students at home.
I would like to express my gratitude to all the staff at school who prepared for today's graduation ceremony. Thank you very much.
The avatar robots, developed by ANA Holdings, were even dressed in graduation caps and gowns.
While I entered this university, I never thought I would control an avatar robot to receive a diploma. I think this is truly a novel experience to receive a certificate in a public area while I am in a private space.
While the university couldn't fit all graduating students into the ceremony, it has still presented a model for other institutions to follow during the ongoing crisis.
Iran says it does not agree with holding any OPEC Plus meeting in the absence of a clear proposal. The organization's video conference is to be held tomorrow to negotiate oil production cuts. In a letter to OPEC, Iranian Oil Minister Bijan Zanganeh said the vague circumstances around the meeting are of grave concern to Tehran. He said there needs to be an agreement on oil production members before any OPEC and non-OPEC members meeting. The minister said the United States and Canada should join in oil output cuts. Earlier, US President Donald Trump and Saudi Arabia and Russia have agreed to cut oil production by 10 million to 15 million barrels per day. The UN says China became the world leader in international patent filings in 2019. Beijing takes the top spot from the United States, which had it for over 4 decades. In its annual report, the World Intellectual Property Organization said a record 265,800 international patent applications were filed last year. It was a hike of 5.2% from 2018. WIPO's complex system of registering international patents involves multiple categories. In the main category, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, China topped the ranking for the first time with 58,990 applications. China and the US were followed by Japan, Germany, and South Korea as the world's top patent application filers. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.